A new chapter is underway in Vermont's ongoing recovery from flash flooding that hit the state the past 3 summers. This fall, demolitions started on properties that took part in a FEMA-funded buyout program led by state officials. We spoke with the Deputy Director of Vermont Emergency Management about the goal of these buyouts and demolitions.
The intent is to then take that site that's been flooded, maintain open space there so nothing can be built there again. It can be accessed by the river if it needs to. And in some cases, like Hardwick, they're looking at a couple of sites in a row where, following the buyouts, we can do restoration projects, we can remove fill that's been added over time, and give the river more space. So theoretically, if we do enough of that, we're lowering flood elevations in our downtowns. It's an opportunity. It came from a challenging scenario, but it's reducing risk in our communities. It's making sure that there isn't someone else in that house that's going to flood in the future. And it's giving us the space to envision what our communities can look like going forward. It feels hopeful, even though it's coming out of something that was very tragic for the people who live in these homes.
And we should point out, this is really just one component of our long-term recovery and resilience planning.
The buyouts they end up being long-term recovery work that happens under our hazard mitigation program, but that full intent again is reducing that long-term risk. So there are other things we do, like making culverts bigger, making bridges larger, upsizing our infrastructure, and removing fill, so lowering our flood elevations, really trying to give the river space and step back from it so that when it needs to access its floodplain, it can and nothing bad happens.
I think there's a psychological component of these demolitions. You and I were in Hardwick together in early October to see that first FEMA buyout property be demolished.
It's a step, it's a turning point in our long-term recovery. My team had a lot of mixed feelings about this day coming up to it. We're really excited about it. We put a lot of work into getting here, but it's also pretty bittersweet because it's somebody's home. These are people who've been flooded, and they've been stuck for 2 years waiting to figure out what this process is going to look like because they've never done it before, and it's complicated and it can take time. But we're finally at that point where we can make that turn towards this long-term recovery goal. And we're starting to see these demolitions happen. We have 35 of them that are about to be ready to go that will start being demolished continually over the next few months.
And there are more than 100 others that are still pending final approval?
Yes, so there's 2 different groups of the buyouts. There's 140 that have received a grant award from FEMA. So all of this is funded through FEMA, and it's managed by the state. So 140 that have that FEMA grant award. Until we have that, we can't start working on the project. We can't do appraisals. We can't do legal work and closings. So for 140 properties, they're moving through that process now under our state-managed buyout program. So that's one big bucket of properties moving forward. We have another 116 properties where we're waiting for FEMA approval, so those aren't moving yet. But of those 140 that have a FEMA award, we're really starting to see the pace ramp up in moving those through to completing the projects, which has been great.
And this is very slow, methodical work.
So there's a significant amount of requirements that we have to go through to get to this place, which is part of why the process does take time. There's a lot of back and forth between the property owner and the town and the state and FEMA and back and forth at different steps in the process. So it doesn't happen immediately. There are federal requirements and state requirements that we have to follow in order to do this work. So it does take some time, but with the state-managed approach, so this is something we've never done before, but we started following the flooding in '23, recognizing the volume, that we were realizing we're gonna have to do something to make this easier, to help streamline this process. So what we ended up doing, and we were building it as we were flying it, was creating this state-managed program where in the past, the town would have to apply for funding to the state, and then we would roll it up to FEMA. Now we're removing most of that administrative burden from the town by having the state apply for funding. And then all of the applications look the same, so when FEMA reviews it, it can be faster. We're taking on that administrative burden of hiring contractors to do appraisals, to do legal, to do the demolitions. and then partnering with the towns to own the parcel, to maintain it as open space in perpetuity, but really trying to reduce the amount of work that they have to do in that process so that they can say yes.
And talk about the partnerships with the individual communities, whether it's Barry, whether it's Hardwick, whether it's Plainfield, any other flood-affected community. Really, the town managers, the zoning directors in those communities, they have been really putting their noses to the grindstone.
Absolutely. It's enough just to say yes. We're willing to let our property owners do this, but to support us through the process, to support the property owners through the process, this doesn't happen without an incredible partnership in that way. We've been working very closely with the towns. We were just in Hardwick. We've done several buyouts under our state funding with Hardwick already, so they knew the process, and now we're doing property buyouts from 23 and 24. So it's an incredible partnership to make sure that we have what we need, that they have what they need, and so we can get through this step. It doesn't happen in a vacuum in any way. It's built on those partnerships.
And the truth is that the property owners, when they participate in a buyout, unfortunately, this federal money, it's not usually making them whole again.
It's not. So the default for all of our FEMA grants for buyouts is that they get 75%. The project is funded 75%. So 75% of their their appraised value is what they would get. And then there's other costs like the appraisal and the legal work where someone has to cover that 25% match. So we're lucky enough following the flooding in 23 to have state funding to cover the match entirely. So we are able to cover 25% of the project costs. So the property owner gets the full 100% value of the day before the storm, which is great. We're in a tight housing market. It's not necessarily enough even then, but at least it gives us that opportunity to give them that full value of their home the day before it flooded like nothing had happened.
Douglas Farnham, the state recovery officer, mentioned that this is really a call to build housing elsewhere because we are losing housing units through these demolitions.
I do strongly believe the best thing we can do for recovery is just the generation, the building, the construction of more resilient housing. Housing is really the best thing we can do for recovery because when we got hit, people didn't have a place to go, right? And you're seeing a house come down right now, so that's one less place to go. But we are putting so many efforts across all of our agencies into building more housing. And so that will help our flood response, our flood recovery. More housing will help alleviate some of the worst human impacts we saw from the last 2 years of flooding.
And that's one of the biggest pushbacks we get from towns when we bring this up as a need in their community is that they need housing. And I think the challenge is it's not one or, it's both and. We need housing and we need safe housing where people can live and not wake up in the middle of the night stressed out every time it's raining. So we need to find a way where we can do both.
What more do we need to be doing?
There's a significant planning need in a lot of our towns to figure out what are the opportunities for reducing their risk. And some communities, like Barry, went through a process after the flooding in 23 to take a bigger look at their community and figure out what should we be doing going forward. I think one of the biggest challenges is that people lose interest. So right after the flood, it's in front of everyone and they care about it and they want to know what they can do. And then if we had a flood in 24, and that was really, I think, for a lot of our towns, a moment of recognizing, oh, this might keep happening. We do still need to be thinking about this. But really keeping that momentum is hard because there's so many other things for our towns to be thinking about. So I think that's one of the big things we need to be doing is thinking about how do we keep flooding at the forefront and make sure that we're looking at assessments in our communities of what can we do that lowers flood elevations, where can we put housing that's more resilient. So it's not just a one-off tied to the flood, but how are we thinking about it in all of our land use and planning decisions.
When you tour the flood-affected communities yourself, what has struck you about the way that the communities are approaching the challenges and opportunities ahead of them?
It's a great question. I think it varies a lot by community, and I think really following the flood in 24, especially when we were in towns, it was that recognition of we really need to think about this and what can we do. So I'm hoping that energy continues. I think it's a lot of relief when we're at the end of this process from towns of making it through this buyout process. just being happy that we made it through, but really starting to making sure that we're working with our communities through what comes next.
And Smith said those demolitions will continue well into 2026.